the pilot episodes of Star Trek. With Section 31 being released and it being essentially a pilot, I thought it was a good time to look back on the pilots. So sit back, subscribe, like, comment, and let's get on with it.
I suppose by the transit of property, I too must be Vulcan as a motherfucker.
Yeah, logic, bitch!
So with TOS, it's quite difficult. I'm going to start off with the cage, which is kind of a pilot for Strange New Worlds as well, but we'll go with the cage. I loved the cage, and I love the fact that it was called Too Cerebral, but it's actually a really basic story. I think Jeffrey Hunter was an interesting captain, if not a little bit sexist, but that's fine. It's all good. We have Major Barrett playing number one. Just some genuinely good sort of moments. The aliens with their pulsating veins in their head, fantastic. The mystery, the zoo. It's so formulaic now. Like lots of sci-fi has done it, but back then it was really interesting. And I don't get why it wasn't picked up, but we'll just go with it wasn't picked up. And I also love the Doctor in this, and I don't remember his name, but old dude, who's Bones-esque, but not quite Bones. I think, to me, and it's weird, the cage is actually a better pilot than Where No Man Goes Before, which is the introduction of Captain Kirk. But also Captain Kirk's friend and him getting transformed into some godlike entity, and we get introduced to sort of this whole new thing. Having Spock in both of those as well, because they haven't quite nailed down his character yet, so there's a bit of smiling, there's a bit of wackiness. I think William Shatner has a lot of charisma. I think that overall, Where No Man Goes Before, I get it, because it's kind of like, oh, this dude's amazing and he's like a god. And there's silver eyes, like watching behind the scenes and the contacts they put on the character. Like, it's genuinely Gary Mitchell, just genuinely interesting. Like, I loved it. It was fantastic. The little continuity era of James R. Kirk, which is something that people just ignore now. But yeah, it was fantastic. I think TOS had some really strong pilots. They were really good concepts, especially for the 60s, amazing. And TOS in general, having Uhura and having Sulu, like just a great sort of introduction to that universe. And overall, like William Shatner holds that show, Leonard Nimoy holds that show. But what did you think about those pilots? Like, I honestly think when I saw the cage, I was like, they needed to make a show about this, and then they did Strange New Worlds a lot later. But we'll get into that. So the next pilot we're talking about is Encounter at Farpoint. Now, this is very difficult for me because Encounter at Farpoint was the first Star Trek episode I ever watched, and as a kid, I loved the technology, the touchscreen panels, the tricorder. I loved just everyone's performances. I remember being just mesmerized by the spaceship and how good the Enterprise D looked. Farpoint Station looking really cool, and then the mystery behind it. And then obviously Q comes in and he's an omnipotent god because Gene Roddenberry loves his omnipotent god-like characters. But it was just like, as a kid, I remember watching this show and going, my God, this is fantastic. This is amazing. Obviously, as you get older and touchscreen becomes commonplace with my phone and such things, that novelty wears off. But I remember watching this show and just thinking how freaking amazing it was. And as a kid, it wasn't actually the story so much as just the feel of the universe of Star Trek. And I hadn't seen any of the TOS films at all, so I didn't even know they existed. But I think the core elements of TNG were there. I do, as an adult, think that it's quite a boring start to a Star Trek universe. It's one of those one of those things where as an adult you're like, whoa, this is so slow. But I still watch this show and I still love this show, and I think it's I can watch Encounter at Farpoint and still get that sort of joy at watching the beautiful shots and the beautiful ships and the actors. I do find the relationship between Riker and Troy very cheesy, particularly in this pilot. But when you watch the motion picture in later years, I guess I do now, there's a lot from the motion picture which sort of pops up in this pilot, which I find, I think that's it's a good thing, because obviously Gene Roddenberry likes to play on riffs, if we're talking about. And Data's a standout, like the whole robot who looks like a man, who's a bit Pinocchio-ish. Like as a kid, those themes of the theme of Data being kind of Pinocchio-ish and the Enterprise being this fantastical ship, and the planet having a mystery, and it's these two aliens who are in love. Like as a kid, that raw emotion is more what hit with it. So I want to know what you think about that, because I watch it now and it's like, oh, I can see this would be a hard watch. If I was an adult, it would have been a hard watch for me. But as a kid, I loved it. Now, on to Deep Space Nine. Now, funnily enough, didn't like Deep Space Nine much as a kid, but the pilot episode is amazing. You have Avery Brooks coming in as Captain Sisko with his son Jake. They lose their mother, and Wolf 359, it literally opens with the Battle of Wolf 359. And as a kid, my God, did I explode with excitement seeing that battle again. Seeing the Saratoga. There's some great shots in this as well. I liked Kira's brashness and sort of snarkiness, which she loses sort of later on. Dax is amazing. The wormhole aliens, the prophets. As a kid, I didn't realize what they were, but Deep Space Nine looked really, really cool. The first season, though, sort of left me a little. I don't know how to put it. I was still too young to watch every episode as it aired, so it was difficult for me to sort of go, oh, I'm enjoying this, because it was so different from TNG at the time. While being an adult, I love Deep Space Nine. I think it's fantastic. I still think the first season's a bit of a slog, but that pilot episode with the loss and the father-son dynamic and all these characters coming together, Odo, Julian, O'Brien coming on board, which for me as a TNG fan was like, oh, cool, O'Brien's coming on board. Really, really fantastic. But yeah, Deep Space Nine took a long time to grow on me, and I only watched it in its entirety in my 20s. Let's skip on ahead. Star Trek Voyager. Now, Voyager is interesting because I liked the pilot for Voyager, but I wasn't big on the story. I think it's probably the weakest pilot in that I didn't really enjoy like the Ocampan thing, and it felt very formulaic. How do we get our crew into this situation? So we've got a series to work on it. I do remember really loving Janeway and really loving Torres. I think that Harry, who at the time I thought Harry was like the most accessible character. I wish that they played with that a little more in Voyager, where Harry was your way in. But I very much I loved Harry as a character, and then I've only really only realized as an adult that Harry is also incredibly handsome. So I was immediately like, Garrett Wang, handsome guy. I didn't really like Chakotay in this pilot, but I did like the idea of the Maquis being sort of a tension thing. And we saw how far that went. And if you haven't, go watch my Star Trek Voyager Season 1 reviews. They're all up now. But yeah, I would say this is probably one of the weakest pilots out of the entire TNG era. Actually, I would say it's the weakest. I don't think it's very formulaic to get you to a situation. I did like the caretaker itself, like the big blob trying to look after a planet. I love that idea. But we go to Star Trek Enterprise. Now, Enterprise is unique in that Enterprise started when I was moderately old, so I could watch every episode. I was downloading episodes before they aired in Australia. And Broken Bow, really good. I think the Enterprise looked really good in that show. I think having Scott Bakula in it as a Quantum Leap fan, I thought this was amazing. I think Trip was great. I think T'Pol was great. I think all of the actors were really good. I think the storyline of the Suliban and Clang and the special effects at the time were amazing. Not so amazing now, but amazing then. But it was also very much about Archer's journey, and it was a slight spin on like the Vulcans and stuff like that. So I think Enterprise really grabbed my attention because it was a prequel thing, so you could sort of see things. And it's the only time I've sort of been excited for a prequel since, to be honest. Like I loved seeing the Klingons in it, and it was interesting to see that they were crinkle-headed Klingons. I remember sort of showing the Enterprise before it launched. The aliens piece, I love the moment where Trip's seeing the mother wean their child on oxygen. Like it felt like, oh, we're going to get a universe where the humans don't quite know what's going on. And that's fantastic. And that does play into the show, just not as much as I would have liked. But Enterprise, I would say, is second in terms of where I would place it in that TNG era. I think that Emissary is the best, then Enterprise, Broken Bow, then Encounter at Farpoint, and then Caretaker. Now to the modern era.